Thank you. Earlier this morning, the BBC News website published a report that a UN panel has urged the UK to suspend the deal, go back to the drawing board and renegotiate the treaty on the grounds that currently it fails to guarantee the rights of the Chagosian people. Could you say whether this UN panel has any legal bearing at all on the situation, and more broadly, whether for this reason or for any other reason were the treaty not to be ratified, what would be the main legal risks to the UK in that situation, and how would the UK be able to defend its position legally? Perhaps Professor Ekins to start.
Thank you. So I've seen a summary of the press report, but haven't read the substantive report you refer to. I think the short answer has no legal effect, but obviously it seems a significant intervention and worth attending to on the merits. And in relation to the provision that the treaty makes for the Chagosians, I think the answer is it makes no provision for them. Its concern is a restoration, if you like, how it's seen from the Mauritian side, of Mauritian sovereignty, and the Chagosians are not protected thereunder, hence the concern. To circle back around to your main line of questioning, I think, what is the principal legal risk? Well, I think as Professor Sands alluded to, it probably is ITLOS, the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. Now, I think, as I say, that we have strong arguments insofar as ITLOS should not be adjudicating territorial disputes and should not be taking an advisory opinion to have settled a dispute when one of the parties has not consented to the adjudication of that dispute. I think that is a strong argument on the merits. It doesn't mean it will succeed, but it is a strong argument. To link the two up, though, maybe this is what you had in mind, I think the one important way in which the UK could strengthen its legal position and draw some of the sting from the critique it's been under is to work much more closely with the Chagosians, who, as far as I can tell, have been largely excluded from the negotiations and this process, and many of whom clearly are unhappy with the resolution that's been reached. Obviously, I don't know what they all think, but I've seen some reports to the extent that, especially those who have a connection to Britain, which I think is very many of them, have very strong concerns about their exclusion from the treaty. And I think the UK really has missed several opportunities to work more closely with the Chagosians in a way that would could arrive at a resolution of some of the concerns and controversies that have been raised that would involve the Chagos Islands remaining in close association with the United Kingdom. I don't think the 2019 advisory opinion, as I say, requires a transfer of sovereignty to Mauritius or recognition that Mauritius is already sovereign. Other options would be open, even if one took the advisory opinion at face value, so to speak. And we have entertained some of these in past policy exchange papers.
Professor Sands?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that question. I'm very glad you've asked about the Chagosians. Just in relation to the risks of the treaty not going forward, again, there is the legal risk to which I referred. But the bigger risk, honestly, is the political risk. I mean, Britain's positions on China and the South China Seas, and it's a case I know well. I was lead counsel for the Philippines against China on the South China Seas. And in relation to Russia and Ukraine, I'm working very closely with Ukraine and the British government on its position. To go back to the situation that pre-existed is to undermine Britain's political position in relation to South China Seas and Russia. That is the reality. And it undermines the relationship with the whole of Africa. Quite why you would do that, I really don't know quite what is motivating those who wish to return to that kind of situation when you had cross-party support for 2 years or more to resolve this matter by reference to a treaty of the kind that was adopted. Now, in relation to the matter reported today, I've not seen, like Professor Ekins, I've not seen the details. My understanding, but please forgive me if I'm wrong, is that this relates to a concern that the agreement will not allow the Chagosians to return as residents to Diego Garcia. Article 6 of the agreement says that Mauritius is free to implement a program of resettlement on the islands of the Chagos Archipelago other than Diego Garcia. And that is inherent in the deal. That's the quid pro quo for moving forward in this way. The deal is that the base will continue. That means that Chagosians could work at the base, but they will not be able to return to Diego Garcia as residents. And I completely understand and respect the bitterness and the hurt and the upset of those Chagosians who were forcibly deported from Diego Garcia and who wish to return and who will not be able to return. The Chagosian community is a marvelous community. It has many views. Some in Crawley would like Chagos to remain part of the United Kingdom. Some in Mauritius and the Seychelles have made very clear through the Chagos Refugee Group and the incredible work of Monsieur Bancu that they wish this deal to go ahead, provided that it's made clear that they will be able to resettle in the outer islands other than Diego Garcia. So that is the nature of the deal that was done. And just to be clear, it is not the case that Chagosians had no role in the negotiations. I can tell you that the Chagosians in Mauritius and Seychelles were deeply involved in consulting with successive prime ministers of Mauritius, and they attended the hearings at the International Court of Justice. One of the tragedies for me, I remember during the hearings in The Hague in September 2018, there were many Chagosians on the Mauritian delegation. As we entered the courtroom, the Peace Palace in The Hague, I was met by a number of Chagosians living in Crawley, now British nationals, who said the British government has not allowed us in, they've not put us on their delegation. And it is the case that the United Kingdom did not find space for the Chagosians on their delegations, but Mauritius did. And Mauritius consulted very extensively. And I personally consulted with the Chagosians throughout the entire 15-year process. So I really want to knock on the head this idea that all of the Chagosians were not involved in the various processes. That is simply not true. It is true, however, that the Chagosian community is divided, and I respect that division, and there can be no difficulty. It's not lawfare for the Chagosians to go off to a UN body and raise their concerns. They are perfectly entitled to do that, but that body will come to understand that this treaty is a political settlement as well as a legal settlement, and there are advantages and disadvantages to all concerned in relation to that settlement, like any treaty.
Just one observation, and one question, given that we can get some legal advice here. It seems to me the treaty, obviously as a layman, Article 1 on sovereignty couldn't be clearer. Mauritius is sovereign over the Chagos Archipelago in its entirety, including Diego Garcia. And then Article 6 basically says it doesn't have sovereignty over Diego Garcia in crucial respects, like, for example, resettlement of Chagosians, should they wish to go there. I can't quite think easily, though I'm sure you could give me examples of a sovereign state in the exercise of its sovereignty is told that parts of its territory are not subject to its authority. But that's just an interested bystander's comment. The more sort of political question, which is about the Chagosians, which I think so badly gets neglected, has done historically. We've discussed it here, and it's simply to ask this: in the remaining pieces of the British Empire, after 90% of it came to an end, and independence was secured for all the members. The various islands and small territories that remain, it seems to me that the one characteristic that governs the UK views of what should happen to these territories, if anything, is the principle of self-determination. Noticeably, obviously, in the Falklands and in Gibraltar. And I just want to ask about whether that principle of self-determination applies here. I wouldn't be very happy with the reply that said, well, it's a question for the whole of Mauritius, including the archipelago. Including Diego Garcia and the Chagos Islands. So is it an applicable principle, I'm sorry, this is one further addendum. Obviously, in any group of people, as Professor Sands has already said, you're not going to get absolute unanimity amongst the Chagosians as to whether it should be Mauritian or British or whatever. You won't in any group of people anywhere, but sooner or later someone has to make a decision as to what the view is, and that's decided by arithmetic, which is the dominant view as to the future of the country. So I'd love you to reflect and answer some questions in that territory. Professor Sands, would you?
Sure. I mean, the position under international law, and it is, of course, subject to critique, is that the right of self-determination accords to the entire population of the colony at the time it is going to obtain independence. And that was what the International Court of Justice determined, and it's what most writers recognize. So it was for the people of the whole of Mauritius to make a determination, not the people of a part of Mauritius, including, in this case, the Chagos Archipelago. And that principle, the right of self-determination, which of course accords in relation to the Falklands and accords in relation to Gibraltar and other places, is a general rule of international law. It's also the same right of self-determination that means that the people of Quebec cannot secede from Canada without the approval of all of the people of Canada. And it's the same rule that means that the people of Scotland cannot secede from the United Kingdom without the approval of all of the people of the United Kingdom, presumably through the Westminster Parliament. That is how the right of self-determination works, warts and all. And just to be crystal clear, the Chagos situation is completely different from any other British overseas territory. This is the only one in which, at the time of independence, a part of the former colony was dismembered. And that was what gave rise to the issue and its characterization as completion of the decolonization of the former colony of Mauritius, rather than a dispute over sovereignty. I understand that it's complex and it may be unacceptable to some people to have that right of self-determination, but that is consistently what national and international courts have ruled is how the right of self-determination works in practice.
I'd ask you to be brief, Professor Ekins.
Certainly. So I think Mauritius, if Mauritius becomes sovereign over the Chagos Islands, in consequence, it can certainly choose, as it will be by agreeing these terms, to allocate very extensive exclusive control to the United Kingdom over Diego Garcia. So the position in relation to Diego Garcia itself is, I think, quite different to the 12 to 24 nautical mile space and then to the outer islands. In the outer islands, it will be Mauritius that calls the shots, I think, subject to negotiation. I don't think the principle of Chagosian self-determination has informed this treaty. It seems to me demonstrable from its terms. Mauritius has a liberty in consequence on the treaty to resettle Chagosians, but no duty. Only a very small fraction of the monies involved seems to have a connection to the Chagosians, namely a trust fund for their benefit to be distributed by Mauritius. The Mauritian record on that is not good, it seems to me, if you look back across the last 50 or so years. So I don't think it has informed it. I think that is a missed opportunity on the part of the government, namely, as I said before, to strengthen the UK's position by taking the Chagosians seriously, rather than more or less excluding them and viewing this as a way of sorting out a dispute with Mauritius.
Baroness Fraser, can you make it quick, please?
Very quick. Just for clarity, Professor Sands, as a Scot in the 2014 referendum, I can correct you that if the Scottish people had voted for independence, Scotland would be independent without the rest of the UK having to say anything else. And can I just pick you up on something you said at the beginning for clarity? You said that you were engaged as a legal counsel from April 2010 to December 2025. So current...
Sorry, 2024.
2024, thank you. And can you confirm that you are a Mauritian citizen, you hold Mauritian citizenship?
Can I just come back to your first point on Scotland, because the position is,
sorry,
I understand,
short of time, and it's not particularly relevant to the
Westminster Parliament has to decide that the Scottish people can decide on a referendum. That is clearly the position.
You'd have to beg to differ, because in 2014 they ceded that to Hollywood.
Yes, indeed. I obtained I was given Mauritian nationality in October 2020, when the hearings were held at ITLOS during COVID. And the COVID restrictions meant that I would have to do 14 days in quarantine to attend for a 3-day hearing. There was no way around that rule in Germany unless I went in on a Mauritian diplomatic passport. I said I was perfectly happy to do the case by Zoom, and I was told no, the government wanted me there. And in those circumstances, they accorded me Mauritian nationality for the purposes of attending the hearing. So yes is the answer to your question.
Just wanted to be clear for the record and for information. Presumably you were remunerated by the Mauritian government for your legal counsel work. Is the amount publicly disclosed anywhere?
I don't know if I was remunerated, as I am for almost all of my cases. It was not done pro bono. I don't know whether in Mauritius it's subject to public government disclosure. I assume I was paid for by the Treasury in Mauritius.
So China currently has the way China operates is through political warfare, and that includes things that you see in Mauritius, like, for example, a large number of very effective elite massage parlors, which all have, video facilities in them. There's money laundering with tracking of who's laundering whose money. There's narcotics. The money laundering is a symptom of criminality, so there is quite a lot of criminality that runs through the Chinese organized crime. And it goes to be an ability to position to exert influence in ways that are difficult to necessarily see or counter, because you're dealing with a decision maker who gets a call saying, "Look at this nice video we have of you, and do you want your family to see it or not?" And not that penetration is already there. But this deal has just made Mauritius one of China's major targets for more political warfare operations. They will put everything they have into trying to destabilize Mauritius, get in leadership who are going to be against the deal, to try to undermine it from within. And it could look like things you wouldn't expect. It's not necessarily just going to be government to government conflict. It could be demonstrations popping up, social media things. For all of the reasons that I just described, the leadership within the U.S. says this is important. It's just as important for China to get rid of the base, for it to have freedom of operations across the Indian Ocean. So the operations that are going on in Mauritius are heavily advanced, and they will now be increased. Thank you. I just as a fun thought experiment, the question as it's written is, how might shifting regional alliances and economic pressures influence Mauritius's long-term commitment to safeguards? Let's replace the word Mauritius with the UK. If I was China, I would be funding demonstrations and operations within the UK to say this is a continuing colonial experiment. We have no money. Why are we giving money to Mauritius? Why isn't there another solution for this? Because the agreement stops if the UK stops paying. So that is, from my perspective, that would be the leverage point. Get the UK to a position where it stops paying and feels morally correct about not paying, and then the treaty falls apart. So there might be a bunch of different ways of killing this treaty, but the UK may be one of the weak points in the chain, especially over the next 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. That's why when the US set up its compacts of free association, it had the same problem with the old Japanese mandate territories. Yap was controlled by the Spanish, and then the Germans, and then the Japanese, and then it became a UN trust territory. And what the U.S. did was it convened a Congress of Micronesia. People from across the region came together to determine their own future. Part of it, Commonwealth of Northern Marianas decided to join the U.S. Other three went independent. This is the separating off that I'm being told is not possible, but it happened during the treaty territory time. Palau became independent, FSM became independent, Marshall Islands became independent, and then they signed compacts of free association with the U.S. And that's something that I don't quite understand why that wasn't done with the Chagosians, given them a referendum. Let them choose. Do they want to go independent? Do they want to compact with the UK? Do they want to compact with the US? Do they want to join India? I mean, as was brought up, they are physically much closer to India than they are to Mauritius. So the lack of imagination in solving this problem, especially given the precedents that you can see in the Western Pacific and the Central Pacific, which are similarly strategically crucial, is a little bit perplexing to me. India is very important. I think, to be blunt, I think that the Indian position is, as long as there's no British colonialism, that's all they really care about. I mean, that just sort of as a starting point. But they're very aware, especially the strategic community, of the Chinese penetration of Mauritius, and the strategic community is certainly not averse to having the base there. I think that there would be a desire to expand it potentially to a Quad plus UK base. I mean, this is what the discussions are very stuck in correcting some pretty horrible things that happened before, the moving of the Chagosians, for example, without thinking about, okay, how can we reimagine this future where what we see happening over the next 10, 20, 30, 50 years can be mitigated for the benefit of security, Indo-Pacific freedom across the region, but also for the Chagosians. The agreement, for example, specifies that Mauritians have should be employed if possible on the base. It doesn't specify Chagosians should be employed potentially on the base. Like the agreement is essentially one colonial power handing it over to the other, and the Indians are very aware of that. So if you'd had if a referendum would have been possible, could be possible, where other options are included, including India in the decision making, it might actually have a longer term strategic benefit for pulling India into a stronger Quad association, which would bulk up the free and open Indo-Pacific profile of the base, and also give more options for Chagosians. Something needs to be done. Definitely something needs to be done. But there are other options that I think give more legitimacy. One of the things that the Chinese Communist Party hates is democracy. And what this agreement is a government-to-government agreement that didn't involve the decision-making, the self-determination of the people involved, the sovereignty of the individual. There's been a lot of talk about land, but not a lot of talk about people. And if the people are involved in the decision-making, that actually makes it very difficult for the Chinese. It hurts their narrative warfare on this decision, on this discussion. So, I mean, apart from being morally the correct thing to do, and I would argue legally the correct thing to do, as we saw with the winding down of the trust territory in the Pacific, it has resulted in a sustained, healthier relationship with the people of the Pacific Islands, who fundamentally don't want to be part of a Chinese vassal state either. I mean, I think the Chagosians wouldn't want to give over a newly won self-determination to the Chinese Communist Party. They would want to be part of a free and open Indo-Pacific. So it's not like I don't see the choices as this deal or just the way it was before. I think that there's an opportunity for creating an agreement of the sort that we have seen successfully implemented for several decades now in the Pacific, that satisfies several different criteria, including the argument that democracy, transparency, accountability, and rule of law is a better system than what the Chinese Communist Party has on offer.